everyone. Welcome back to the AI Founders Masterclass. Happy to see lots of people returning. This is our second week in the AI Founders series. And if you're joining for the first time, remember to check out the resource materials that are in our Slack channel, and you can connect with other members in the community there. And that's also where you can find our previous talks. That includes the Geoffrey Hinton and Fei Lee talk, as well as our excellent practical session on building AI responsibly with Sarah Hooker and Molly Welch this week. So get back into the Slack community if you want to go check out those resources. So just a quick reminder that this is a community. So here's the community guidelines are also posted in the channel. Please take a quick moment to review them. We will be guided by them and reserve the right to remove people from the community if they're not following these guidelines. Just want to remind you that after this session, we're not over. We still have a third week and a fourth week. Next week, we will have Daphne Cohere from Cohere joining us. We'll also have Ian Stoika from Databricks joining us in the fourth week. And even this week, we have lots of practical sessions ongoing. So tomorrow, you're going to hear from Oliver Cameron, who will talk about building AI product again with some more tactical pieces. And he'll be talking to Rob Taves. And then we have some more really exciting practical sessions ahead, including some sessions from our own team that help our portfolio companies build. So they have an opportunity for me to hear from all of those people in the upcoming weeks. And last but not least, Cohere is joining us to run a hackathon this year. We're really excited about it. So if you haven't signed up already, please go to Lab. That's a link there. There's also the channel AIFMC Hackathon in the Slack community. Ask us questions there. Cohere is on board and doing lots of mentoring sessions. And then also, if you're able to snag that gold medal, you will get a 15-minute coffee chat with Aidan Gomez. And Nick is joining us today and can speak to Aidan's excellence. So we're really looking forward to hosting that. So please find your team and jump on in. So with that, that's the end of our housekeeping. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions and reach out to me if you have any questions in the Slack, of course. And today, it's my pleasure to welcome Radical partner Salim Teja, who will introduce today's discussion. He has over 25 years of experience in the technology sector. He's been an entrepreneur. He has been a venture investor. He currently is a venture investor. He's also been a corporate innovator and innovative ecosystem builder. And so he's held many leadership roles, but also he's co-founded Mobshop, which was funded by GE, Visa International, Mayfield, and Merck and Andreessen. So he is also my colleague, and we're so happy for him to be here today and hosting this discussion. Hi, Salim.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Radical AI Founders Masterclass. My name is Salim Teja, and I have the pleasure of facilitating our discussion today. And please remember, our hope is to make this an interactive discussion. So if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Radical AI Founders Slack channel, and we'll be sure to get to them in the Q&A portion of our talk today. This week, the Radical AI Founders program digs into the fundamentals of building AI products, and we're extremely excited to be joined by two remarkable founders. Nick Frosst is a co-founder of Cohere, a startup that provides natural language processing models that help companies improve human-machine interactions. Nick was Geoff Hinton's first hire at his Google Brain Lab. And fun fact, Nick is the lead singer in an indie band called Good Kid, which is touring this fall. So I'm sure he has lots of stories to share. And I also want to welcome George Sivulka. George is the founder of Hebbia. Hebbia develops AI productivity tools used to reinvent the search engine. George worked at NASA at the age of 16 and dropped out of Stanford where he was doing his PhD program before founding Hebbia. And I'm sure he's got some great stories to tell about his journey as well. So Nick, George, welcome to our session today, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Why don't we start with just a little bit of background on each of you two. George, maybe you can start by sharing with us a little bit of your journey prior to starting Hebbia, and maybe if you can weave into there, tell us a little bit about the first software product you ever built as part of that.
That's very fun. I'd say probably the first software product that I ever built was in one of my earliest research projects, which was less a product and more a simulation, where we were using something called finite element modeling to detect where landmines were under the earth from a radar on a satellite. And so kind of the earliest research that I ever did was mostly in physics and computational physics, and how we could use simulations to kind of affect what we could find in the real world. And for some background on who I am and Hebbia and whatnot, when I was in my PhD, I actually was fortunate to see some of the earliest transformers. And I remember the first time I saw them, was very surprised at some of the things they could do. Second time, took note, and third time, when it surprised me, I decided this might be the most important technology of the next 100 years. And part of the journey of Hebbia was actually a lot of writing after that moment, when I decided to dedicate all of my waking hours to studying these things. And I wrote about, what I thought the most transformative technology of the last 100 years was. And after a few hours of writing, I thought it was probably actually the SQL database. And my follow-up question was why no one on the street knew what the SQL database was. And I asked myself, what is the actual product that was built on top of this technology that actually ended up accruing the most value or giving the most amount of value to like end users and real people? And I thought it was actually Excel. It was like this human layer to this underlying technology. And so carrying forward to at the time, it was around 2020, I said, well, if large language models are going to be so important, what can I build that's a good human layer on top of them that can accrue and create a lot of value for the end user? And since then, I've spent the last almost 3 years now, trying to build that human layer, trying to build an Excel analog that allows anyone to create anything in the application, chaining together or calling in various ways a bunch of different smaller tools or agents or unstructured models and unstructured databases. So that's a bit of the story. Happy to double click.
Amazing. Nick, tell us a little bit about your journey and maybe the first software product you ever built.
When you say software product, do you mean like the first piece of code I wrote, like the first project?
Yeah.
Okay, the first piece of code I wrote, I think I wrote in like grade 10 or grade 9, and it was on a programming language called Turing, which is used exclusively in Ontario high schools for the purposes of teaching programming. And I wrote like a little spaceship game where you moved your mouse around. And I didn't know about for loops. So it was all go-to statements. And I didn't know about indentation. So when I messed up one of those go-to statements, I had to print out the whole thing and like read through it and like trace it with a pencil. So that was the first piece of software I ever wrote. It was truly horrendous. But I look back on it very fondly. It's like funny to think about that. So anyways, that was the first thing I wrote. I years later can't say I write much better code than what I wrote back then. So Cohere is we're a foundational model company. We make large language models. We give them to people. We're these days focusing on enterprise. Like we're focusing on getting these models to be useful and to exist in code bases, solving problems. Turns out there's a pretty big gap between this tech exciting and like inspiring people, and just as George alluded to, there's like a gap between the SQL database and people using it all the time. There's a gap between large language models and companies using it. So we're really focusing on trying to get this tech to be useful. Before this, as mentioned, I was a researcher at Google Brain. That's where I met Aidan Gomez, who was one of the authors of the Transformer paper. I was not working on language models at Brain. I was working on vision models and adversarial examples and explainability. But I too was surprised by Transformers. Very, very similar to George. Got really excited about it after being introduced to it. So we left Google, almost 4 years ago now. with the objective of making a company whose sole aim was to make large language models, which weren't called foundational models at the time, but make large language models and give them to people, and subsequently, give technology language. So we've been doing that since then, and it turns out wild time to work in NLP and transformers. It's very exciting these days. So yeah, still working on that now.
Amazing. Well, the topic of our session today is around building AI products. So maybe we should start with, your thoughts on what's different about building AI products as opposed to building non-AI software. How do you think about that exercise and the work that you do day in, day out in your companies? Maybe Nick, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm tempted to take it very philosophical very quickly. I know this is the first question. But I mean, on the face of it, the only difference between building an AI product and a non-AI product is an AI product, you have a very convenient buzzword to throw around. But like, that buzzword wears thin pretty quickly. Like people don't really want to interact with something simply because you tell them it's AI. I mean, like even what AI is has changed very rapidly, right? Like as soon as something is mundane, people no longer really call it AI. People don't call chessbots AI anymore. But like that's what was, when chessbots were big and they were a new thing, it was referred to as AI. And I think there's lots of people going out and like playing with chessbots and feeling like they were, interacting with some digital intelligence. But when that becomes mundane, what is left is like, is it a good chess app? Am I having fun playing chess? So I think when you're building an AI product, like ultimately the AI at some point needs to be irrelevant. You need to have built something that somebody is using and it's improving their lives, even if they never used the word AI or they didn't care about AI or they thought the whole thing was boring. So it needs to do that. I mean, like these days when you say building an AI product, what you really mean is building a product with a large language model or a foundational model, probably a large language model, but like maybe an image model or something. Just some huge model somebody else has trained, you are now using it for a purpose. There's a lot to be said about what it's like to build with large language models, and the various pitfalls and the various things that they're particularly good at, things they're particularly bad at. It feels very different to program where your like back end is a large language model. So we could talk about that, but I'll pass it off to George for comments or anything before we.
Yeah, George, your thoughts on AI products versus your experience with non-AI products. Is there any sort of nuances that are important as you either differentiate or find similarities between the two?
The prevailing wisdom when we started was that if you were building an AI product, it had to be a great product without AI for it to be used and successful. And what I repeatedly heard was that AI could not be the product. That if you replaced it with some sort of like deterministic or kind of algorithm based method of old, if you will, the product should still provide value for the users, and the AI should add something on top. It seems as if we've kind of thrown that prevailing wisdom out the door, and like a lot of products right now are really just AI, or like that AI is like this core feature. And part of that is, as we've moved towards general intelligence, the window of what the models can take and the amount of noise that they can handle for any task has really grown. And so they become more robust, like these quote unquote products of old used to be robust. But at the same time, I don't think that it's we're at the point yet where like something can be like entirely just AI, or that like a true value additive product can only be given with AI. And for an example, kind of Hebbia started in search. Now our customers have led us to like a lot of other use cases, but sometimes a semantic search database will get you really, really good and really, really close to finding an answer of something that's in the data. but you'll actually go and see how people use and interface with the AI chatbots, and you'll notice that they're not asking questions that are in the data, but they're asking questions that are about the data, which is pretty funny, because you're never going to get about the data with a cosine similarity, semantic similarity score that finds the closest possible passage in the data. And I think the way that I would think about building an AI product, and the way that I do think about building an AI product, is to still find kind of robust algorithmic choices that you can make to provide value. And where the user is opting into AI, giving them a lot of insight and explainability into why the AI and what the AI is seeing, and how it's arriving at its answer. So you can build a lot of empathy between, this less deterministic, seemingly more stochastic thing that people think they understand but don't really understand, and what the actual end user wants to see. So
now, I think one point that you both highlighted was, AI or not, it's important to have strong product discipline as you're thinking about building a product and taking something out to market. I'm curious to know whether you have or your organization uses a framework that perhaps to guide you through how you think about developing product, and some of the key inputs that you use to crafting a good product strategy. George, start with you.
I think there's two approaches to building product, and one of them is like more scientific, and one of them is more like mathematical. And there's entire schools of thought that say, hey, don't even listen to a user, don't be very empirical, just go out and if the user wants a faster horse, build a car. And that might be more true for AI, where people have no idea what they really want. At the same time, there's kind of the prevailing wisdom, which is like, let's A/B test and kind of look at how users respond to X, Y, and Z different opportunities and different options that you can put in front of them. And I think AI products more than anything else do require a bit more on the analytical side. You don't have a lot of empirical opportunity. You don't have a lot of different options. Your users actually don't have a prevailing framework or even preferences 99% of the time. And so a lot of the work that we have to do is kind of pre any sort of testing. Yeah.
Nick, any models or frameworks that you think about?
Models or frameworks, not really.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. I think the reality, our product is, a tool, right? Like we're building a thing for people to build on. That's really what we sell is models. So that necessarily ends up being pretty technologically driven. Like that ends up being, we have this technology, we're trying to push it, trying to get it to do as much as it can, as best as it can, stretching its limits, adding new capabilities. A lot of that is guided by talking to people and asking them what would you like it to, what would you like it to do? Or looking at, we look at, the ways that people misunderstand large language models is very helpful, right? Because they expect it to be able to do something, it can't do that thing, and then we're like, oh well, let's figure out if it can. Recently we shipped a retrieval augmented generation endpoint. So now search is just part of our model. You can just ask it a question, tell it to Google search something, Google search, find relevant information, write a response, tell you where it came from, and cite its sources. I'm that's because that people expected large language models to be able to do. In fact, explaining to people that a large language model couldn't do that out of the box was really complicated. And you try, especially when you start talking about we're training data, and they're like, well, why doesn't it know what happened yesterday, or something like this came up. So I guess we talk to people, customers and people, to figure out what they think it could do, and then figure out if we can get it to do that. But it's certainly more of the two camps that George outlined. It's certainly more of the leading by technology, as opposed to A/B testing subtle changes to our API endpoints and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it does seem like there's this fine balance between, trying to get feedback so that you understand how users are reacting to your early thoughts, but not necessarily diminishing the art of the possible that this technology can unlock, and maybe even giving them something that they don't know they ever needed or that capability ever existed. And it sounds like with both of you, you try and balance that fine line between those two areas in order to really create breakthroughs with your product. Let's start on the first piece, which is just getting feedback and how you take that feedback and iterate in your product teams, and what does that iteration cycle look like as you're developing and learning? Nick, I know with Cohere, you have a pretty large ecosystem of developers who are playing with your product and integrating into other types of solutions or creating applications. What does that feedback cycle look like? What does the iteration cycle from that look like? And how important is that to kind of guiding the evolution of your product?
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. We look at what people are trying to build with our technology and figure out if it's actually helping them build it, and if it's not, we try to make it better. Now, there's a balance to be struck, and that's one of like data privacy and retention. So lots of developers are building something with data that like they don't want to share with us because that's a proprietary thing, and so they opt out of our data policies, and then we can't even see what like we can't see what goes in and out of the model. Or they use a SageMaker deployment where our model is deployed within their walled environment and we don't even have access to it. That's a huge value add that we as a company provide to our users. But the trade-off is then we can't annotate their data. We can't like look at what the prompt was and get a person to look at it and improve the output of the model. So we've had to find a balance between those two things. One of the ways we do that is by like, instead of looking at the data that people are giving us, just talking to users and ask them like, hey, where is it? Where is it not good enough? Where is it exceeding expectations? Where is it not meeting them? And we get like vague suggestions. And then we go back to our annotators and we say, hey, like try to have conversations with the model where you get it to do stuff like that. So it's super important. But if we over-index on that, there's a lot of people who couldn't be using us. There's a lot of people who like couldn't use our model at all because they're doing it on proprietary data. And as a company who's really focused on like actually, unblocking everything to make this technology actually useful, that's not a thing we're willing to give up. So we have to do these deployments, and we have these data opt-out policies and stuff like that.
George, your company's also in market with customers now, getting feedback, iterating. How do you manage that feedback? How do you use the feedback to kind of iterate your own product strategy? And what does that look like internally at Hebbia?
I think it's important to, first, as Nick said, we serve the US government and many of the largest financial institutions in the world. And so data privacy is like first and foremost for us. A lot of the time we can't actually train on any sort of our user data, but we try to allow our users to opt in to training and to opt in to changing their experience on our platform in two ways. And one of them is actually saying, hey, you can, in writing or in a very tangible modal on our app, say, I would like to give the model feedback, or I'd like to actually say that my actions on this product would go into training. And there's plenty of warning signs and whatnot, but that, if they opt in writing and the customers agree to that, you can actually allow the user to give the product feedback in a way that, users can't for almost any other kind of, app of old type application, right? Because the model can actually learn off some of the data that you might collect from those actions. On the other side, there's on the product side, like very clever things that many folks have done where, OpenAI allowed people to add to their system message in their GUI, right? To actually say, hey, my name is George Sivulka, and I'm the CEO and founder of this AI company, and this is my background on X, Y, and Z academic subjects, so that when I go and ask, the model has that context every time. And similarly, Hebbia lets people, add context about themselves, but also go in and add synonyms and whatnot, and actually build an ontology or taxonomy, if you will, of the way that they view the world. And we found that that was very important, not only for kind of receiving that feedback and developing on it, but allowing the user to change their environment to fine tune it for kind of what they're looking for.
Again, both of you mentioned, I think, the importance of data and, the access to the data, the permission data, helping guide, the product that you're building and giving you some direction. For you and your teams as you're building product, how challenging is that to sometimes have access to unique data sets where you can do a lot, and in other instances not having either permissioned access or access at all? And how do you sort of navigate your decisions as you think about your product priorities, given that complicated scenario that you're operating in with your communities? George?
Yeah, I think as I kind of mentioned before, it has to be like there's actually like illegal problems and there's regulatory problems to collecting the wrong data and working off of the wrong data. And a lot of AI applications that are in less regulated or kind of less secure domains than the one that Hebbia operates in, I think can readily go out and add that data, and that can actually add to their moat in certain ways, because by users using the platform, they're actually building some positive feedback loop that allows the model to get better and that allows more usage, and that collects more data. We have to be much more tactful. And we have to have disclaimers, and for a lot of customers where it matters, we can't offer that. But at the same time, we also offer public-facing data sets that you can interface with that still allow us to collect, feedback from our users. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Nick?
Well, I mean, we can't look at the data we can't look at. So
Yeah.
I'm never tempted by it because I've never seen it. So I don't know. Like maybe people are putting tons of amazing stuff into our model that we'd love to train on, but I don't know. So we can't, I don't even know what it looks like. So yeah, I think like sometimes we've done engagements with large enterprises where they'll give us like one prompt and they'll be like, oh, this is the stuff we're doing, but you can't actually see the rest of it. And then we just try to identify that prompt and come up with like similar looking stuff, just using annotators, but that doesn't include any of their like actual data. So we do that, but mostly we're not tempted by it. We just focus on collecting more data through human annotators.
Now, I know many of the people in the audience today may be new to product development and product design. There's this elusive term that we always talk about in product strategy, really around product market fit and trying to find product market fit. Maybe in your own words, how would you describe the concept of product market fit and how you think about that within your teams? Nick, maybe starting with you.
Yeah. Yeah, this term comes up a lot. There's many terms within entrepreneurship that just seem to be like they sound like incantations more than they are taxonomy or something. Like they're just these kind of magic words that people wave around to be like, wow, yeah, there you go, you've done it. I think product. I don't think. I think product market fit is only something you can claim in retrospect. You can't really be like running towards it. It's only something that you can look back over the past few weeks and be like, there we go, we had it. That's it. I think what that is when your problem is informational arbitrage. Like when you've gotten to a point where the more people know about your product, the more money you'll make, that's product market fit. That means you built a thing that people are willing to pay for, and the only thing that's stopping you from making more money is getting more people to know that you're offering it. That I don't know if that's helpful. Like in some ways, I don't know if thinking about that is helpful, because you can't really look into the future and say, what do I need to do to get there? You just know at some point, hey, you put more money into advertising and suddenly your revenue went up. Cool. Okay, I guess that means the problem you had was informational arbitrage. Or one customer told another customer and suddenly you're getting more people like signing up and paying you. Cool. I guess the problem you had was informational arbitrage. Now you have product market fit. So yeah, that's how I define it, but I don't think it's very helpful to think about,
George, your thoughts?
I really like the idea of informational arbitrage because you kind of it does, the idea of product market fit feels like hey, yes, marketing is what's gating growth, right? It's like getting the word out. I'd say that there's product market fit, the way I traditionally think about it is from like kind of two vectors. Like one is like what the market thinks that it wants in one ICP, and the other is like what your product's actually offering. And you want those vectors to be like as closely aligned as possible. And whether it's like analytically getting there or through some like optimization with a bunch of user feedback, you're changing your product vector to try to overlap as much as possible with what the market is looking for. And one thing that's quite interesting in AI, and I know there's a lot of kind of AI founders here that are thinking about their own businesses and product market fit and whatnot, is I think there's the idea of product market fit, which means, okay, the product itself is actually meeting that market need and is actually there. But the larger industry and what people are buying a lot of the time is actually narrative market fit. Like people want to go on their earnings call and say like, hey, we're transforming X with AI. And they want to be able to say, hey, we're spending $10 million of R&D on AI. And hey, we're going to buy this Pinecone and Weaviate database, and we're going to go build AI in-house. And all of those are things that people want to say. And in reality, they're things that people want to feel. And one question that you guys as entrepreneurs should ask yourself is, am I building a product that's actually getting in the hands of users and that is serving a need? Or am I selling a narrative? And both are okay. Sometimes you have to sell the narrative to build the product. But narrative product market fit is very different than product market fit. And I think few people realize that, and AI is like one of the places right now where there's very strong narrative fit. People want to spend money. They want to feel that they're spending money on this thing. I wouldn't call that product market fit. And there could still be an informational arbitrage. The more people find out about your company, the more they want to spend money on this narrative. But I'd also, kind of go into some level of maybe it's not informational arbitrage getting money in the door, which was what it is usually for businesses where kind of, product and narrative are more closely aligned. But, look into usage, look into, some level of like NPS score, number of clicks and whatnot. I think that's actually much more important. So.
Yeah. That's a really good distinction to make. It does have the issue of like, if my definition of it was only looking back, yours is like, get it and then wait 6 months and then look back again and then say, hey, was that narrative or product? Like it pushes it out even further. But I think you're totally right to make that distinction, especially in AI. There seems to be a big, like this is the space where there's the biggest gap right now.
Now, as each of you are going through your product journeys, I'm curious, if you've made mistakes. I'm sure you have made mistakes with regards to your products, but what would some of those areas of learning have been as you've been going through your early journey with your products? Nick?
Yeah, we definitely made mistakes. I've talked about this on Radical calls before, but when we started, we were making our first thing we were making was a autocomplete Chrome extension. That was what we were making. Like had this big language model and we were like, what are we going to get it to do? We're going to help you type faster. There are still people working on that, not within Cohere, but outside of Cohere. But it's not us. We're not excellent at making Chrome extensions. We're not excellent at making user products. We're excellent at making models. Like that's what we make. And that's it. So I think that mistake was like thinking we could tack on another thing and be like, we have this core competency and thinking, hey, yeah, we'll also do this for the purposes of, I don't know, getting people to use it or something. But really what we want to do is just make models, and everything we do with the purpose of trying to make that model better. Sometimes that does mean like adding, making little websites, making little things for people to use the model, but the purpose of that is to make the model better. So that was one mistake, was like not focusing enough on our core competency. Yeah, the other was like, I think sometimes in the early days, like in the first year or something, we did not think the models were going to get as good as they did. And so we weren't trusting enough of our own technology. Like when I look back 2 years ago, like the stuff I was trying to build with our tech, I was thinking we were going to run into quality issues much, much earlier than now. Like we spent a lot of time trying to think of how to like create an API that would always return a JSON object, because developers using LLMs often really want to return a JSON object. And that's because I thought there's no way in hell we can get a large language model to just always write good JSON. Like surely there's going to be issues parsing whatever thing it writes. That's not true anymore. You can just write, give me it a JSON object, and it'll just return like a JSON object just fine. It's returning things that are very easy to. I mean, hell, it returns totally functional, runnable, compilable code. Like yeah, JSON objects are significantly easier than that. So we didn't trust in the technology enough in the early days. Yeah, so those are two mistakes.
George, for you, any learnings or mistakes in the early days of Hebbia?
I make mistakes every day. I think, a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship as this, kind of wonderful thing, but a lot of the time there's many ups and downs. And you'll feel the highest highs and the lowest lows, like, within the same week, within the same 12-hour period. And it's part of the ride. You have to like that. You have to love that roller coaster. And I think similarly to Nick, we actually started with a Chrome extension as well. So I was having a bit of a laugh to myself on mute when he mentioned that, because Hebbia actually started with a search extension that would find something in a page. And similarly to Nick as well, there's plenty of people that are working on that right now, but it's also not us. And I think some of the mistakes that I made were, thinking about something that I thought people would use versus pay money for and use, right? So I thought people would use the Chrome extension, but I realized that I was trying to build a product for people that people would pay money for. And so I didn't have enough of a understanding of what my end user actually felt a need for versus what they thought was cool or useful. And I think that you should hold yourself to the highest standard. One of the things that people often tell early entrepreneurs is that, you're trying to convince someone to part with their most valuable resource in the world, which is money. And it's not actually time for a lot of consumers. It's money. People are willing to buy into any narrative and kind of, experiment with a lot of things. But to build something that really solves a pain was one of the most important things. In an AI where a lot of people think it's like this nice to have narrative thing that they want to spend money on, you also have to find the pain. You have to opt into something that is one of the most painful possible tasks to do without your product. Whether it's with an existing product right now or whether it's by hand, that's kind of where you should be looking. At the same time, kind of other mistakes we've made. I used to only hire mathematicians, not computer scientists, because I was a mathematician. So don't do that. And I think it's in the interest of being commercial minded as a technical founder, probably many of the people on this call or listening in are very, very technical. Try to push yourself to be more and more commercial as well. To get people, especially in business to business sales, to part with that most valuable resource, it's important to really understand them and to empathize with them. It's not just about building a product most of the time that sells itself. And a lot of people like to say that that's the thing.
So that leads me into my next question, which is, as your company started to grow, and you started to think about building out product teams and product leaders within your organization, what were the skill sets that were important that you were looking for in really getting that kind of product leadership into your organization to perhaps complement the skills that you had? George?
Well, if I'm a analytical mathematician, I think I've sought out empiricists, to complement that. At the same time, I think a lot of different for a full stack product, a lot of different product leaders will want to specialize in one part of the domain of development that you're working on. And so you should look for specialists that partner very closely with engineering leaders for each of those domains. If someone's working on platform, finding a product leader that can really complement on the platform side. If someone's doing research, finding a product leader that can complement on the research side and that has relevant expertise. It's amazing to have specialists that can actually dive deep in each of those regards. And as you build out that organization, kind of invest as a true partnership, because a lot of product is engineering enablement. It's taking that vision and distilling it into super actionable, kind of stakeholder agnostic, agreed upon and disambiguated path. Vision's a very fuzzy thing in an ontology. The path that the product leader gets you to is absolutely not fuzzy. It's a very distinct point. So
Next, any thoughts on product leaders?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like especially as a company that's technology driven, we've had to find product leaders who are very excited about the technology and who understand how it works, and who enjoy like messing around with it and trying to push its limits. That's been very helpful. And we try to find people who have that, as well as a keen eye for product and for talking to customers, understanding what they want, what they want, and how to divine that from what they've said. So it's kind of looking for a mix of these abilities. But I will say I feel like we just kind of got lucky, like it's like some of these questions I feel like how do we know who are the right product people? Like I'm not sure we do. I feel like we've hired a lot of great product people that we happen to get lucky, but I can't say it's any like complicated strategy aside from talking to people and saying, hey, are you like excited? Are you as excited about this tech as I am? Do you know some things I don't? Do you have some skills that like nobody else here has? Are you gonna vibe with the community? Are you gonna like, give it everything you've got? Those are the heuristics. Those have worked out more than they haven't worked out. But I mean, hiring anybody is difficult, and I don't think there's like a set of questions you can ask that will be necessary and sufficient for figuring out if a person's going to be a good fit.
All right, the next thing I wanted to just quickly cover with you, put yourself back in your early founder days, having sort of a product vision, assembling a team and sort of working on your early prototypes. One of the big themes in today's world is getting access to compute to really be able to help navigate the training that you may need to do, or how you think about scaling the product. Any advice for early entrepreneurs in our ecosystem here, how to think about compute and the role that compute plays in informing how you think about getting momentum in the early days of your company?
Yeah. I can speak to that. Though my answer will be at first relevant only to other foundational model companies, of which there are not that many. And the reality is that's because it's just such a resource intensive thing to do. There's not a ton of us. When we started, we had access to a very small amount of compute. And so we spent the first year working on a training infrastructure that allowed us to grab slices of GPUs spread across a data center, chain them together with networking, and train a model on that. So like our first thing was training a 100 billion parameter model over like really, really cheap compute. And the reason it was so cheap is that it wasn't full pod, like TPU pods. It was disparate TPUs spread across multiple regions even, I think. So we like figured out, hey, here's what we can do to train a 100 billion parameter model on that. We never did train a 100 billion parameter model on that, because if we had, it would have taken a year and a half, which is not super useful. So then having done that, we were able to demonstrate, hey, we have the credibility, we have the technical chops, we got some funding that allowed us to rent full TPUs and GPUs, and that meant we could train it in the normal way without doing that stuff. So I guess like the approach to compute there was just be really scrappy to start and to work with what you have, and to like, you know, if you don't have enough compute, you're just going to trade, like you're trading, compute is trading time for money, right? Like you can do anything you want on a CPU if you want. It'll take really, really long, but like, yeah, you can, it's a computer still. They're all still the same computers. So you can demonstrate what you're doing will at least work before throwing money at it and getting more compute. I think these days, when there's a bunch of foundational model companies out there selling access that doesn't need compute, it just needs money, right? Like you don't need any compute to use a Cohere model. You can use a Cohere model via Amazon SageMaker or an on-prem deployment where you have your own compute. But if you have no compute, you just have money, you can access a model via a network API. I think a lot of startups these days are going to be using stuff like that. They'll probably like download yeah, I mean, like to start, they might download a really cheap or like really small model, run on a tiny amount of compute, demonstrate their thing will at least work. And then when they want more performance, then they can throw money at it and get access to a big model. So I guess actually, never mind. I've convinced myself this is the same answer. And the answer is just like be scrappy to start off with. Know that compute is trading time for money. When you have time, use that. When you have money, use that. Yeah.
George?
I think you know, Nick has a good answer, which is basically, you know, play to your strengths at the period of time when you have those strengths. Early on, we had our own GPUs in the office that we would train on, and we trained much smaller models. The Nick's company, and we still do train smaller models. And I think we're maybe one of the only companies that does that today, and still does some level of training to incorporate with our product. But you know, I think for the majority of people right now, the title of the GPT-3 paper was, you know, these super large language models are also multitask learners, which means that you could give them a kind of, you know, few examples of something to go baseline off of, and actually go and see them execute at that task pretty damn well. So, you know, a lot of people talk about compute as this like limited resource, or GPUs as this limited resource, but for the majority of very product-oriented companies, I think your first and foremost thing that you should be doing is trying to find the ephemeral product market fit, or you know, narrative to product market fit, and then go and, you know, worry about distilling models or creating more efficient models. But we're in an age right now where you can make an API call to you know, Cohere or whatever large language model provider you'd like, and start to see these models perform a task which is well within their scope of things that they can do and execute on, and leverage that. I don't actually think the whole kind of GPU scarcity thing is something that's impacting everyday founders as much as it's impacting these large language model training providers, foundation model companies, and then academic labs. Yeah.
Fair enough. Before we open it up to Q&A, maybe, you know, I'd love to ask you one last question here. You know, you've got an audience here of researchers that are thinking about the journey to entrepreneurship, and maybe in some instances translating their research into a product innovation that they're extremely excited about. You know, what advice would you give people in our audience about, you know, what that experience is like, and what might be helpful for them to think about as they're starting the journey? Nick?
Yeah. I guess something that I've twice now when I've had conversations with Radical about this, I've like remembered something that happened in my past that I normally forget, which is that this is actually the second company. The first company I founded was out of a research lab from York University, and it was working on computational vision. And we were doing saliency prediction. So we were trying to like take an image and predict where people look in that image. And I tried to found that company because I was working on algorithms to do this, which was take an image and predict where people are going to look in that image. And I was like, that's cool. I bet that would be useful for something. So we tried to make a company for that. Now, I normally forget this because it didn't really work. Because we tried to do it, we never really got funding. We eventually sold like a GitHub package to a marketing person for like $20,000, which, to be clear, as a university student was awesome. Like, it felt, that felt good. But that wasn't the generational company that I'm excited about now that I'm like trying to build. So I tried to do that in undergrad. And I wouldn't call it a resounding success. But I would also say it wasn't a failure, and that's maybe like it could have gone worse. We could have tried to do it and not sold it for $20,000. But the difference between that, that was spread across many people. Like, yeah, well, it wasn't a big deal. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if it doesn't go well and you try to spin your research into a company and it like fails, you'll probably forget about it in a few years, and that's the worst it'll be. And like that's just to say you should try it. Like why not? Like get a few people together, talk to some people. The worst thing you're going to do is waste your own time. And like, I don't know, we all got a fair bit of time around. So I would suggest it. And then if it doesn't work, think about why it didn't work. And maybe if you want to try something else later, you'll have learned. Like, I think the thing I learned from that was like, just because an algorithm was cool on paper didn't really make it actually useful. It turns out people actually aren't too concerned about this. People look at billboards. It doesn't really matter where in the billboard they look. Like, it's not, whatever. It's not a massively important thing. And I thought that algorithm was super cool. And I maintain it is super cool, but it wasn't really a great product. But trying to do that did nothing wrong and just made me have a pretty good time with a few people who I still really like. So yeah, I would say try it.
George, any advice?
Maybe the most important thing that I could say, and if the only thing that you remember from this conversation is this, I'd say when you're starting a company, you usually want to do something that other people think is crazy. You want to be doing the large language model company, probably not today, but 3 years ago. If Nick and I started our companies right now, we might be able to get some funding, but I think it'd be a much harder path to get to where we're going. When we started, 3 or 4 years ago, we might have been some of the very few entrepreneurs that were talking about large language models, or enabling them or building these products. And the prevailing wisdom might be, hey, go and build a product that can work without AI, George. And as an entrepreneur, it's your job to do something that is contrarian and right. It's not just about, being contrarian, but it's about being, doing the thing that other people think is crazy, and being right. You're making a bet with your time because the market doesn't want your company to exist. If it did, there'd be a company for it. So, it might even be better to build a crypto company right now than an AI company, assuming there might be a crypto wave in 3 years. Like there's an arbitrage there. And I know I'm on a radical AI call, and I know we're all excited about large language model companies. But maybe, this is the advice that you didn't want to hear that is important for you to hear. But it's make a bet where, where other people think you're crazy and you believe in your bones that you are right. Because right now, the bet that I'm trying to make, and I'm sure it's a bet that Nick and his co-founders are trying to make, is like, what are we making an investment in that other people might not be, so that we can stay ahead of the curve, so that we can beat out the market or whoever else is coming in at this point in time.
I definitely want to second do something crazy, but I want to add a caveat, which is don't build a crypto company. But otherwise, very much agree with George.
Listen, I also don't think it's a great idea to build a crypto company, for the record. I think this is going on the internet. I think there's a lot of value that can be created in any other kind of vertical. I think there's some value to be had in crypto and whatnot. But my point is to look at the place where other people aren't looking at that point in time.
Fair enough. That's fair.
Definitely. Well said.
Okay, why don't we turn to some Q&A from the audience? I'm going to ask Leah to help us here curate some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a reminder, folks, you can post your questions. Tomorrow we'll have more of a practical session where you'll have some more camera time, but just to get through a bunch of questions, I'm just going to go look through them and ask some questions. So first of all, there's a lot of thanks in the chat. So thanks again, George and Nick, for being here. So there's a lot of anxiety judging by these upvotes, particularly around Microsoft eating our lunch. So the main question that's been upvoted here is, how can we build moats, particularly around large language models and using large language models? Ravi says, as I'm building products, it feels like Microsoft and others can easily replicate most of the use cases. So I leave it to you to describe how you think about moats.
Oh, yeah, just to be inflammatory and for the purposes of maybe we'll spark some debate. I think moats are for castles. I don't think moats exist. I think moats are like a venture capitalist's fantasy. It's this idea that you can like do a thing and then just like sit back and like, oh, your business is great. You're protected by a moat. You don't have to do anything anymore. It's exactly the dream of like, putting in an investment and then doing nothing and then have that just be like protected. I think there's only execution. I think there's only like your ability to do the thing and the difficulty of continuing to do it. I mean, if you look at like this, like every industry, you kind of think of like, what is Coca-Cola's moat? I don't know, like what is like, there are things that are like very difficult to build. And once you've built them, it's going to be hard for somebody else to do it. Like a large language model is a difficult thing to build. Once you've done it, it's daunting. But I'm sure there's always going to be people trying to build large language models. We're not the only ones doing it, right? Like there's many more, many more people trying. And I think that's true in every industry. So I think the question shouldn't be like, what can I do to make a moat? It should just be like, what can I do that other people are going to have difficulty doing? And that's never going to be static. That's never going to be fixed. That's never going to be dug and poured and you put the alligators in it and now you can just sit back. That's always going to be something that you're like, it's the wrong mental construct. It's easier to think about it as like a marathon instead of a battle, right? Like an ongoing thing that you are actively involved in trying your hardest and doing your best. For LLMs, like I know that's people think about this and they think like the difficulty is, building the LLM. I think that's not true. Like I've seen a ton of companies use our tech to do stuff that is really difficult to do. Like I opened this by saying we originally were making a Chrome extension for autocomplete, and we're not doing that because that's hard, because we're not great at Chrome extensions, because we're great at large language models, and that's really what we're great at. That's pretty much all we're great at. So I would encourage people to figure out like what's the tech that you're great at that other people will be bad at, that you have an advantage in because of your research, your grit, your interest, your network, your like whatever it is, and work on that and use an LLM as part of that if it makes sense. But the difficulty of creating your company will not be having built that LLM. It will be figuring out how to actually use it and add value with it and build a thing that other people couldn't build. Yeah.
George, your thoughts on the competitive dynamic that companies need to navigate these days?
I'll echo Nick's thoughts on moat, especially to the extent that I don't think that product or technology or data are really moats. One of the ways that I think about what the question is really asking is, how can my business be more robust to changes and to challengers? And I think robustness comes in a few different ways. At Nick's level, it might be being infrastructure that's harder to pull out and change. So it might be frustrating for in like 5 years people to change all of their Cohere API calls if they build lots of crazy products on top of Cohere. It's actually a larger enterprise investment. There's a larger switching cost. You might actually have to re-engineer something from scratch to actually change. For Hebbia, one of the ways that I think it's harder to pull out That doesn't mean it's impossible, but I would say that it's, usually that reluctance comes from people and from social dynamics. So, if you think about Excel, in 10,000 years, Excel will be opened by archaeologists to understand the 1980s to the 2020s, for sure, right? Like Snowflake will be gone, undoubtedly, but Excel will still be around. And it's because it's a file type, it's a phenomenology for processing data, for processing structured data. It's because people share it, because it's an actual store of information. It's a store of process. So when thinking about moats, it's like, well, Microsoft is a pretty damn good moat there, because they control how people look at structured data. I think that Microsoft will continue to build a lot of applications here, but it will be hard to replicate that. Let's see.
Leah,
Great.
next question.
Yeah, so there's an ongoing debate in the chat, and I think some clarification would be helpful. This is directed towards George, but Nick, I think also via Cohere, you'll have some thoughts here. So George, if your users have private data, what is their incentive to train your models on the data and implicitly help their customers who also use your product? And so there's been some debate back and forth around understanding training for themselves, but do you let your customers use the models that are trained on one company's data to use the trained models and parameters for their competitors? I think I know some of the answers here, but I think some clarification would be helpful on how you think about users and customer data. And I think, Nick, it would be great if you jumped in on this too.
Absolutely. To be clear, we do not train things for one user and then go and take that insight and give it to another user or to another company. That's not something that we do. There's public users or public data where different kinds of companies might be willing to do that because they're more interested in helping themselves and they don't care if it helps others. But the wide majority of the time, we're not doing that. So,
Nick, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a really clear a really clear indicator of this in our tech stack. Like there's a button that says opt in or opt out of data retention, right? So we can look at how many people are choosing to keep that on or turn that off. We make that pretty visible. So I think that's like a conscious decision people make. I think the trade-off is if if the data thing is on, then at some point we will annotate on it and try to make it better. And you can expect over time, we ship a new model like pretty regularly. You could expect the same prompt that you're putting in to get better. Like that's the trade-off. If you don't do that, we won't see it. No one will ever see it. It'll never be trained on it. But the prompt your prompt will not get, well, your prompt might get better by the nature of the models getting better in general, but your specific thing won't have been improved and given back. So that's kind of the trade-off. And a fair few people, leave it on as a result because they know that like, okay, cool, I'm going to put this prompt in. When Cohere releases a new model, someone will have looked at my thing specifically and made sure that the output from the model was good, and then we will have trained on that. So that's a pretty clear trade-off for some people, and some people are willing to make it when they're working on things that don't have private information or they don't have secrets that they're worried about or things like that. And other people, they're working on personally identified information, like absolutely, even if they wish to make that trade, they could not. And so then they go down the Amazon SageMaker deployment something, or they go down other private deployment avenues.
Next question, Leah.
Great. So I like this one from Aditi. What is one skill you had to learn that you didn't already have while building your current company?
99% of the things I do every day, I had literally no idea how to do. Forget about when I started, but last year. So, part of this founder journey is reinventing yourself, and running a company at scale is very different than running a company at different orders of magnitude or on different stages in your pre-revenue, post-revenue, pre-product market fit, post-product market fit, pre-customers being willing to respond to your emails, point in time. And I'd say part of being a founder is going out and being cognitively flexible enough, and maybe determined enough to go and fail a lot at new tasks until you become great at those tasks. or to have co-founders that can complement you and do that as well. So,
Nick?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, George, we're agreeing too much in this. It's
we can
but yeah.
can argue.
Okay, I'll try.
Someone ask a
I'll try to-
spicy question.
Yeah, so much, but no, I think I'll try to. Yeah, definitely. So much of what like my job looks very different than it did when I was a researcher. It looks completely different. My job does look very different now than it did a year ago. So it does continue to change. I think just to give like some tangible things, like some things I have to do much more of are like people management. Like I was a researcher, I wasn't managing people, right? Like that's a totally new skill. And no matter, you don't get better at managing people for reading research papers. That's the thing you just have to learn while doing it. So that one's a consistent one, but otherwise, like, yeah, it changes all the time. The one thing I think I'll say, maybe I'm just disagreeing with you for the purposes of it, but I have found that it feels pretty similar actually as the years have gone on. But like the types of things I'm thinking about or the types of problems we're dealing with, it's not that like the difference between, when we were 10 people or now when we're above 200, it kind of feels the same. It's kind of the same. You're still kind of dealing with, the same issues. Are people aligned? Are they having a good time? Are they working on the right stuff? Do customers like what you're giving to them? Like the scale of it changes, but it has felt pretty similar. Sometimes when I talk to other founders and they'll be like, oh, well, like it's a bigger company. This is not so totally different. I'm like, no, it's the same shit. You're going to feel pretty much, yeah, similar. Yeah. I guess like the content of what you're working on really changes, but the feeling is really similar as the years go on.
Nick, a quick follow-on to that came out of the question asking here is, what does your day-to-day interactions with your co-founders look like? How did you know these were the people you wanted to start the company with?
Well, my day-to-day interactions with Aiden and Ivan are a lot of jokes, to be honest. It's like jokes, intense, heated disagreement, conclusion, jokes. I think that's like the span of it. The three of us, how did I know that I wanted to found the company with those people? Well, I liked them as people, and I still like them as people. And I think that's really important. Like setting aside, we have like, interests in the same stuff and we had the same vision. Like, I just think they're both good dudes. And I like talking to them about stuff that has nothing to do with work. And so that's helpful. I will say, as the company has grown, there's more and more demands on us. And so we need to work harder on like making sure, we're still aligned. And we're still like aware of what's going on in the heads of the other people. But yeah, how did I know that they were the right people? Yeah, I think it's mostly just that I respected and trusted them and liked them as people. That was the biggest thing.
Great. And then George, as a sole founder, how has that journey been? Have you thought about that?
I would never recommend solo founding to anyone. It's the worst possible thing you can do. And at the same time, after a lot of pain, I get to come to work every day, and there's a few incredibly talented humans that I get to laugh with and vehemently disagree, and that's what makes it worth it, right? So just surround yourself with people that you love, especially if you're doing a hard thing. And at the very least, you'll get to laugh.
I like that. So we're getting shorter on time, but I will ask a question that has less to do entirely with product development, but a little bit in the AI world. So this was directed at Nick as both a musician and as an AI entrepreneur, but I think little do folks know that George is also an artist. I believe that beautiful art piece behind him was painted by George. So definitely not an artist. And so as both artists and AI entrepreneurs, how do you feel about work being used to train generative models in the art world and having folks make money off of that? Are you worried that AI can make the next good kid? And how are you thinking about models and copyright?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. So just to give some background, so I play in a band. The band is called Good Kid. We've been releasing music since well before the generative AI excitement. So I've kind of seen this industry, like how it's handled that. I'm not worried. I'm not really worried about it. And I'm not worried for a number of reasons. One of them is that I see the way people engage with art is increasingly by understanding and connecting with the person who made it. So we all went to go see like Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer recently, right? Like we didn't go see Oppenheimer. We saw Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. And there's like an importance of that. You know, it's like, especially like even in the way people interact with Good Kid, like it's a lot of wanting to know about us and like connect with the person who's making it. I think that's because that's one of the huge draws of art. You know, really what you're trying to do is get human connection. Now, I think people will use AI to augment art the way that they used all kinds of other recording devices and other like audio innovations. But fundamentally, you're listening to it because you want a human experience. You want to connect with people and you want to know more about them. Like I went and saw a DJ show recently, and it was very good. It was huge. It was like really well, really well attended, massive event. Those two DJs on the stage, excellent performers. They did not need to be there. From a technical perspective, they did nothing. They they could have pressed play and the whole show could have gone off the same. And yet, them being there made the show so much better because it's the music that they made. It's like they were the ones who created it. It was their expression, and them being present, even though they could have gone up to the deck and clicked space, let the whole thing run its course. They're not like, it was super important that they were there because that's what the art is. So like, I don't use our model for writing our lyrics, not because it couldn't do a better job than I could, but that's because that's not really what I want from music. So that's about like automation in art. The other part of the question is about like, you know, training on models and making money from that. So all of Good Kid's music is DMCA free. So this means like any music you want from us, you can use in anything. You could use it on YouTube, you can use it and monetize it, you can use it on a Twitch stream, you could use it in a movie, you could do whatever you want with it and like not pay us. And it's been that way for a really long time. And ultimately that has ended up making Good Kid more money. That has made a more successful band by not demand. Now this comes from a real place of privilege. Like we as musicians who have other jobs, we had the luxury of saying, hey, we can trade the royalties that we'll get this year for future plays. So I have to put a caveat around this to say like, this is a position of privilege that not every musician has. But if you have the ability to make your art available for people to use and engage with and remix and play for free, ultimately it will end up paying off. And I think that about AI these days. I think like, if you're making something that is going to inspire people and they're going to see it within generated content, they're going to be interested in who the person was behind that. And they're going to look into that style and they're going to like go there. Now, I think this is there are going to be artists who like by the nature of their artistic expression, don't want their art involved in generative AI. And I really think there should be a way for them to say like, the same way that we have like robots.txt in websites where you can say like, nobody scrape this, don't index this. Like this is not for robots. This is only for people. We should have a similar thing within art. Like I would love it if there was a tag we could put into images that would say like, yeah, don't use this for training because my artistic expression is like, that's not something I'm excited about. I would love it if there was a way to do that. And we should probably think about developing it. But I know that even if we had that, Good Kid would be putting at the end of our music like, hell yeah, train on this. Do whatever. And that's, we've been doing that for years with our DMCA free approach. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts on that, evidently.
George?
Echo that. I think, some artists should be able to and can opt in, if they're currently alive to letting their work be trained upon or not. I think the mediums are changing, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think there's purposes for artistic expression which are kind of larger than the mediums themselves, and I think people will still paint photorealistic things in 200 years, maybe for them more than for a museum. But I think art is a part of the human experience, and even if models do it, that doesn't mean people shouldn't do it. I think there's going to be, and there already are, plenty of artists that are adopting AI as a tool to make art faster, to become additionally inspired, to create new kinds of art. And I'm excited to see that happen. I don't think it's the end of art at all. I think it might allow more people to create. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think the bar for creation will be different. It might be higher, but it will definitely be different. And that is very uncomfortable. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Awesome. Okay, I think we've hit our time today. So I want to thank Nick and George for the conversation. I know we touched on a lot of different topics and stretched the theme today. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And Leah, I'll hand it over to you just to wrap us up.
Great, thanks everyone. So just before you head out, a reminder that we have our hackathon coming up. So do sign up for that and check out the hackathon channel, ask questions, find a team. It's going to be excellent. There's lots of great prizes involved, and it's a great way to interact with much of our team. There'll be lots of mentorship too from some of the Cohere folks. So do get involved in that. And then finally, our practical session on building a product. We're going to be back here tomorrow, same time. We're going to be having more of a dialogue. This will be with Oliver Cameron, who's at Cruise and Voyage, and also Rob Taves. He's also a partner at Radical Ventures, so we get some more dialogue. We can dig into some of the practical questions that we didn't get to today. And that's it, folks. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, George. Thank you, Salim. And we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
Thanks you all.